In the heart of an old wooden house, where the floorboards sighed under quiet footsteps and the air always smelled faintly of cinnamon and stories, a strange little drawer waited. It was not in the kitchen, nor in any bedroom or hallway. This drawer hid inside a forgotten cabinet tucked beneath the attic's slanted roof, behind boxes of winter scarves and one-eyed dolls. The cabinet had no handle, no keyhole, and most curious of all, it never gathered dust. While the rest of the attic lay sleepy and still, wrapped in cobwebs and the hush of years, the drawer seemed to shimmer, just slightly, like it was holding its breath. One rainy afternoon, the kind when the world outside turned silver and soft and the windows whispered with droplets, something changed. A small golden beetle with wings as thin as rice paper scuttled across the floor and paused in front of the cabinet. Its eyes sparkled with knowing, and its tiny legs tapped the wood twice, once, twice. The drawer gave a faint tremble. Downstairs, 7-year-old Mira traced her finger along the patterns in her storybook. Her parents were busy unpacking the last boxes from their move into this creaky house. Mira didn't mind the quiet. She liked the way the house made sounds, like it was always talking to itself. But today, a tickle of something strange brushed her cheek, like a breath of wind that came from nowhere. Above her, the hidden drawer clicked. It was the softest sound, no louder than a falling feather, but it sent a flutter through the attic shadows. The golden beetle slipped through a crack and vanished. And somewhere, deep inside the drawer that no one remembered, a tiny crown blinked open its eyes. Mira had always been curious, but today, her curiosity buzzed like a honeybee with too much sun. She followed the feeling, something like a tug behind her belly button, all the way up the narrow attic stairs. The wooden steps groaned politely under her weight, not in protest, but like they were surprised to feel feet on them again. As she opened the attic door, dust motes floated like glittering fireflies through the shafts of light. The air smelled older here, tinged with secrets. She stepped carefully between towers of boxes and crates, her eyes drawn toward the back of the attic, where the light seemed dimmer. That's when she saw the cabinet. It was small, painted in faded blue with chipped gold along the edges. She couldn't explain why, but her chest gave a soft thump when she saw it. Something inside her whispered, "There, that's it." Mira knelt in front of it. No handle, no keyhole, just smooth, silent wood. She pressed her fingers along the edge, feeling for anything, a catch, a groove, even a wobble, but the drawer didn't budge. Still, she didn't leave. Instead, she placed both palms gently on its surface and closed her eyes. The attic seemed to hold its breath with her. Then flutter. A tickle of warmth, like the breath of a kitten, brushed her hand. Slowly, the drawer slid open. Only a crack, but enough to make her heart skip. Inside, tucked neatly between layers of deep blue velvet, lay a crown no larger than a teacup. It shimmered with tiny crystals and curious carvings shaped like stars, leaves, and moons. Beneath it, a tiny silver bell sat nestled beside a folded note. The note read, "To the finder. The queen awaits. Ring the bell when the moon has blinked once. Only the kind may enter." Mira blinked. What did it mean, the moon blinking, and why her? But the crown seemed to hum in her hands as she lifted it, lighter than she expected, warmer too, like it had been waiting for her. She set it gently on top of her head. Nothing happened. She looked around, half expecting fireworks or music, but the attic stayed still. That night, long after bedtime, Mira sat by her window with the crown tucked beneath her pillow. Clouds drifted across the moon, and for just a moment, the light dimmed and brightened again like a wink. A blink. She hurried to the attic. In her hand, the tiny bell chimed with the gentlest sound, soft as a snowflake. At once, the cabinet drawer slid open wide, revealing not just the velvet lining, but a swirling spiral of light that seemed to dive deep, deep down, far deeper than any drawer should go. The air shimmered like glass, and the scent of jasmine and pine filled the room. Without thinking, without even being afraid, Mira stepped inside. Down she fell, but it wasn't like falling. It was like being carried by wind and stars. Lights blinked past her glowing creatures, floating feathers, upside-down trees, and rivers made of song. She landed softly on something springy, like moss, and opened her eyes. She was in a forest, but not one from her world. The trees were taller than houses and wore cloaks of silver bark. Their leaves glowed faintly, and their branches twisted into delicate archways above her head. The air was warm, and somewhere, a waterfall whispered like a lullaby. From between the trees came a rustle. Mira turned. Out stepped a girl no bigger than Mira's thumb, her dress stitched from flower petals and her shoes made of curled leaves. Her wings shimmered, not like a butterfly's, but like thin glass reflecting moonlight. On her head sat a crown much like Mira's, only tinged with lavender. The tiny girl bowed her head and raised her hands in welcome. Behind her, others emerged, dozens of small folk with eyes like polished stones and voices like wind chimes. They circled Mira gently, smiling with wide, curious faces. The tiny queen touched her own crown, then pointed to Mira's. They understood each other. Mira was in the land of the hidden drawer, a secret world meant only for those who carried kindness in their hearts and curiosity in their bones. A world that opened only when the moon blinked and the bell rang true. But all was not well in the hidden drawer. As they walked together through the glowing forest, Mira saw signs of trouble. Trees had started to wilt. Petals had lost their color. A soft sorrow hung in the air, like the sigh of someone who had waited too long. The tiny queen pointed toward a distant mountain, jagged and dark against the soft skies. "There," they said without speaking. "There lies the forgotten crack." It was a place where stories leaked out, where memories disappeared, and kindness was swallowed up. Long ago, something had broken beneath that mountain, a seal, a promise, maybe a dream, and the sorrow had been growing ever since. The creatures of the hidden drawer had done what they could, but the crack had widened. They needed help. Mira felt something tighten inside her chest. She was just a girl. She didn't know how to fix a crack in a mountain or heal sorrow. But the tiny queen took her hand and placed a crystal seed in her palm, smooth and glowing softly. This, Mira understood, was hope, not the kind you could see, the kind you had to believe in. The queen led her to a glimmering path that wound through the trees like a silver ribbon. Along the way, Mira saw wonders, a lake of lanterns that floated without flame, deer with wings like dragonflies, mushrooms that whispered old lullabies. The beauty made her chest ache, but at every turn, the land seemed tired, like it was holding on with its last breath. They reached the mountain at dusk. It loomed above them, sharp and silent. A heavy mist curled around its base, thick with forgotten dreams. The path grew narrow, winding up steep ridges. The air grew cooler, and Mira's hands trembled, but she held the seed tightly. At last, they stood before the crack. It was not large, just a jagged line in the mountain's heart, but it pulsed with cold. From it came a sound, low and whispery, like voices that had forgotten how to sing. The creatures dared not go closer. Only Mira could cross. She stepped forward. With every step, memories brushed against her, some hers, some not. A baby's laugh, a lost toy, a song sung on a swing. The mountain tried to pull them away, tried to make her forget who she was, but Mira held tighter to the seed. She remembered the crown. She remembered her parents' warm hugs. She remembered stories read beneath blankets. She remembered kindness. And then, just as the mountain's wind rose into a wail, she reached the crack and placed the seed inside. The light burst outward, not in noise, but in warmth. It spread like a blanket, soft and golden, pouring into every corner of the land. The crack sealed with a sigh, and the sorrow melted like frost under sun. Mira fell to her knees, the crown slipping from her head. But she was smiling. The ground beneath her glowed gently. And far below, the trees began to bloom once more. For a moment, everything was still. Mira knelt at the base of the mountain, her fingers resting on the place where the crystal seed had vanished into the earth. She felt the warmth pulse once more beneath her palm, like a heartbeat. The wind that had once howled around the mountain was silent now. The mist had lifted. The mountain no longer loomed, it stood, proud but peaceful, as though it too had taken a deep breath for the first time in ages. Behind her, the tiny queen and the forest creatures stood in hushed wonder. Their wings trembled gently, their glowing eyes wide with amazement and hope. Flowers were already blooming at their feet, soft purple and blue petals unfurling toward the light that now streamed through the clearing. But something still tugged at Mira's heart. A rustle, quiet but sharp, came from behind the trees. Mira turned quickly, her eyes scanning the forest edge. At first, she saw nothing, only the swaying of new leaves, the flicker of shadows. Then she noticed it. A figure. Unlike the tiny queen and her kin, this one stood tall as Mira. Its body was dark, almost like the shadow of a person rather than a person itself. Where its face should be, there was only a swirl of fog. It stepped forward, slow and gliding, and with each step, the flowers beneath it withered. The tiny creatures gasped. The queen stepped back, her hand reaching toward Mira in warning. Mira stood, heart thudding. She knew this was no friend. This was something else, something that had come from the crack. It had not vanished with the sorrow. It had been waiting, watching. The figure raised its arms, and a cold wind rushed through the trees. Leaves flew, the light flickered, and a chill swept across Mira's skin. Her crown slipped further, but she held it fast. She didn't run. Instead, she stepped forward. The figure spoke, but not with words. Its voice filled her mind, a whisper of doubt and fear. You do not belong here. You are small. You cannot fix what is broken. Mira's knees wobbled, her fingers curled tighter around the crown. The whisper slithered again. You will forget. They all forget, even queens. She shook her head, but the voice crept deeper. This world is not yours. It never was. You are a guest in a dream. Leave before you are forgotten too. Mira took one step back. The wind grew colder. Behind her, the forest folk huddled together, their tiny lights flickering. The mountain seemed to shudder again, and a new one began to form at the edge of the clearing. Fear coiled around Mira's ribs. But then, something warm pressed against her fingers. It was the crown. She looked at it, truly looked. It wasn't grand, it wasn't glittering, it was soft gold, simple, with tiny symbols etched around its rim, stars, moons, leaves. Not for ruling, but for remembering. Not for power, but for care. She placed it on her head once more, and as she did, her memories flooded back. Strong and bright, the smile of her mother when she made pancakes in the morning, the way her father carried her when she fell asleep in the car, the scent of her old blanket, the joy of helping her neighbor find a lost kitten, all the little pieces of kindness that had shaped her. She remembered herself. The figure hissed. The wind howled louder, branches snapping, the new crack spreading like a spider web. But Mira walked toward it, her eyes locked on the swirling face. You are not truth, she thought. You are fear, and fear only grows in forgetting. The ground trembled, but she did not falter. The closer she came, the smaller the figure seemed, shrinking as if Mira's light pushed it back. Its edges wavered. It hissed again, louder, more frantic. The wind tried to blow her away. But then Mira raised her hand and spoke not with her mouth, but with her heart. She didn't fight the fear. She felt it. And then she forgave it. The swirling face blinked. And then, slowly, the shadow crumbled. Not shattered, crumbled like dry leaves in the sun. It didn't scream, it didn't thrash. It simply faded piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a soft hush. The wind stopped. The crack in the ground sealed itself, line by glowing line. The light returned, stronger than before. The tiny queen stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder. She looked at Mira, not in awe, but in gratitude. Then she bent slightly, a gesture of deep respect, and placed both hands over her heart. The forest creatures followed. One by one, they came forward with gifts, not things, but gestures. A feather placed at her feet, a swirl of glowing dust. A flower that bloomed only at night. They sang not with words, but with harmony, a music that seemed to grow from the ground and the trees and the sky. Mira felt it wrap around her like a warm blanket. The song carried her upward, not with wings or wind, but with belonging. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was back in the attic. The cabinet drawer was closed. The bell rested quietly beside it, silent. The crown still sat gently on her head, but something had changed. It felt stiller, as though it had done what it needed to do. Mira stood slowly. The attic was just an attic again, dusty, quiet, ordinary. But she knew better. She walked downstairs, crown in hand. Her parents were still unpacking, laughing softly as they sorted books into shelves. Everything looked the same, but Mira felt different, like a lantern had been lit inside her. That night, she placed the crown back into the drawer. As she closed it, the golden beetle scuttled by the door and paused, just for a moment, its eyes glinting in the moonlight. Then it vanished once more. Mira smiled. The hidden drawer would always be there, waiting, watching, for the kind, for the brave, for those who remembered who they were. The days that followed moved softly, like the quiet flutter of pages in a story well told. Mira went about her world as she always had. She brushed her teeth, helped her parents unpack, played with the neighborhood kids, and read her favorite books by the windowsill, where the light was just right. But something inside her had shifted. She smiled a little more often. She listened more closely when others spoke. She noticed the small things, the way the wind moved through leaves, how a lonely classmate sat on the edge of the playground, how her cat purred louder when gently brushed behind the ears. The memory of the hidden drawer lived in her like a dream that never quite faded. She could still see the silver forest, hear the chime of wind-laced songs, feel the warmth of the crown atop her head. But she didn't speak of it to anyone, not because she was told to keep it secret, but because it wasn't the kind of story you told with just words. It was the kind you showed through your choices. One afternoon, Mira visited the attic again. The cabinet was still there, dust gathered now on its edges, and the drawer did not shimmer like before. When she reached for it, it stayed shut silent, still, as though it had gone back to sleep. She placed a gentle hand over it and whispered a thank you, not expecting an answer. Yet the air warmed slightly, and a faint sparkle, almost too soft to see, drifted across the floor like a tiny farewell. Mira turned away, her heart content. The hidden drawer was not a place to visit again and again. It was a gift meant to be carried forward. She began to see the world with new eyes. When her teacher dropped a stack of papers in the hallway, Mira was the first to kneel and help gather them. When a little boy cried on the school bus after losing his lunchbox, she shared her own sandwich without hesitation. When her neighbor's dog got lost, she stayed out in the rain, calling its name until it returned, tail wagging and soaked. These were not grand deeds. They were small, tiny even. But Mira understood. Now kindness was a kind of magic, quiet but strong. It mended things. It stitched invisible threads between people. It healed cracks that could not be seen. One morning, a letter arrived. It was tucked between the pages of her favorite book, which she was certain had been closed since the night before. The paper was soft and folded precisely. Inside, in handwriting as elegant as wind-written frost, were just 5 words: "You are still our queen." Mira pressed the letter to her chest. A soft glow filled the room, as brief as a sigh, as lasting as a promise. That evening, she gathered her courage and did something she hadn't done since moving into the house. She stood at the front of her classroom and shared a story during show and tell. Not the full tale, not the drawer, not the queen, but a story about a mountain that was cracked and how someone small placed a seed of hope inside it. Her classmates listened quietly, even the noisy ones. When she finished, they clapped, not because it was flashy or funny, but because something in their hearts had been touched. Afterward, one girl with tangled braids leaned over and said she wished she could be brave like that. Mira simply smiled and told her she already was. Spring came. The trees outside blossomed in pinks and whites. Birds returned with songs in their throats. Mira planted a tiny garden in the corner of the backyard, just a few wildflowers, a bean sprout, and a ring of moss she found behind a rock. Every morning, she whispered kind things to the soil, and every evening, she checked for signs of growth. One morning, as dew sparkled on the grass and the sun yawned across the sky, Mira found something unexpected in her garden. It was a beetle, golden, just like before. It didn't scuttle away this time. It sat still, watching her with glinting eyes, then raised one leg and tapped the earth once, twice. Mira knelt, careful not to disturb it. Beneath a large leaf, she saw something nestled in the moss. It was a tiny seed, no bigger than a pebble, but it shimmered faintly with the same light that once filled the air of the hidden drawer. She knew at once it was another gift. Carefully, Mira planted the seed at the center of her garden. Not in a pot, not marked with a flag just there, in the soil, where the sunlight was soft and the wind played gently through the grass. She didn't know what it would become. A flower, a tree, a doorway, that didn't matter. What mattered was tending to it with love. And she did. Days turned into weeks. The garden flourished. The tiny seed sprouted a stem, then leaves shaped like stars. It grew slowly, but Mira never rushed it. She watered it gently. She spoke to it kindly. She protected it when heavy rains fell. It became a part of her world. Sometimes, late at night, Mira would sit by her window and look at the moon. She always watched for the blink. It never came again, but that was all right. The hidden drawer had given her something greater than a visit to a magical land. It had given her the crown of her own heart. And that was a crown she wore quietly every day, not on her head, but in her actions. She ruled not with orders, but with compassion. Not with a throne, but with listening ears and open hands. The forest of silver trees remained in her dreams. The tiny queen sometimes visited her thoughts, silent and smiling. The shadow was gone. The crack had healed. And Mira had grown not taller, though that would come in time, but deeper, kinder, braver. In the quiet of the attic, the cabinet waited. Not open, not closed, just still. Like a book whose next chapter had yet to be written. Because somewhere, someday, another child might hear a faint click in the silence, might feel the tug of wonder, might open the drawer when the moon blinked. And if they did, they would find not just magic, they would find themselves.